Hi, everyone. On today's podcast, we're going to talk with birth doula and EBB's programs team assistant, Rikki Jenkins, about empowering expectant families through birth and lactation support.
Welcome to the Evidence-Based Birth Podcast. My name is Rebecca Decker, and I'm a nurse with my PhD and the founder of Evidence-Based Birth. Join me each week as we work together to get evidence-based information into the hands of families and professionals around the world. As a reminder, this information is not medical advice. See evbirth.com/disclaimer for more details.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ia Mystique Fao Dugun, pronouns they, she, and I will be your host for today's episode. Today, we are so excited to welcome EBB's own programs team assistant, Rikki Jenkins, to talk about empowering expectant families through birth and lactation support. Before we begin to interview Rikki, I want to let you know that there are some detailed or maybe some detailed content or trigger warnings. And if so, we'll post them in the description or in our show notes that go along with this episode. So now I would like to introduce you to our honored guest. Rikki Jenkins, pronouns she, her, is a certified birth doula and certified lactation counselor. Rikki holds a bachelor's of science degree in maternal child health with an emphasis in human lactation and social justice. Rikki is the co-creator of Heart and Soul Collective, an inclusive pregnancy support center where she hosts support groups, teaches childbirth education, and lactation classes to expectant parents. Rikki also serves as a board member for the Southern Nevada Breastfeeding Coalition, and Rikki also provides all-inclusive services to expectant families and birth professionals virtually, as well as in the greater Las Vegas Valley and surrounding areas. We are so thrilled that Rikki is here. Welcome to the Evidence-Based Birth Podcast, Rikki.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited that everybody gets to see us highlight one of our greatest, staff members here at EBB. So I want everybody to know, can you tell our listeners just what led you to your journey to becoming a birth worker and the various roles you have in birth work? Because I've only stated like you're a birth doula, a lactation counselor, you're also an EBB instructor. Like you have a lot of hats that you wear. So let our listeners know, what led you to your role in birth work.
That's a big question, but of course, like many others in this field, I was inspired through my own experience, good and bad. Our first pregnancy ended, unfortunately, in a miscarriage, and from that on, kind of pivoted my whole outlook on life, essentially. And so I did so much research. I watched all the documentaries, I read all the books, and then I concluded that I needed a doula for my birth. So I hired the doula. I'm thinking, everything is going to be perfect. I'm good. Unfortunately, when I got to the hospital, it wasn't that. My husband and I were kind of met with a lot of disrespect during our experience. We didn't really feel heard during our experience. So that was very traumatic for me. And a few other traumatic things happened against my will during the birth, which also kind of led me to wanting to research why my experience was that way. Everything I read said, hey, you're good if you have a doula, you're protected, everything like that. But what I didn't account for, and through my readings after I had my daughter, was the maternal mortality rates, especially for Black folks. So that kind of put a light bulb in my head, like, this is why. That makes so much sense why, they weren't supportive. They weren't supportive of my breastfeeding journey or my chest feeding journey. And that was one of the things that I really wanted it to go right, was feeding my daughter, because our birth didn't go exactly as we planned. But even then in the hospital, I wanted to quit. I didn't know what I was doing in feeding my daughter. But my partner was very much like, no, you did not stay up throughout your entire pregnancy, reading all the things about pregnancy, birth, and feeding, that I'm going to let you give up. So it was really because of him that I continued my feeding journey. But even that was hard. Even through the encouragement was hard. I tried to get help and I couldn't get help. And so finally, it was 2 weeks after I had her. I would never forget. And I had a delivery at the door, and it was a delivery of this big, huge box of formula samples. And I was like, this must be a sign. I need to give up. Like, I need to be done. So I said, you know what? I'll give it till tomorrow. And if things doesn't change by tomorrow, then I'm done, and I'm going to give her this formula. So I was laying in bed that night, and I was scrolling through idly through the internet, and I came across this group on Facebook, and it was specifically for Black lactating folks. And I said, okay, let me join it. I was immediately added right away, and it was 3 a.m. And I'll never forget. I was like, I know there's probably people sleeping. Like, they're not going to get back to me. But I said, hey, I'm struggling. I need help. And I was met with tons and tons of support. Like, I have not felt that supported since before my first pregnancy. And they said, you know, hey, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Really, like magic. I was, of course, after that, I had some healing to do, but like magic, I felt like our feeding relationship was saved. And from then on, I went on to breastfeed successfully. And then I was inspired. I said, hey, you know, all it takes is to, you know, help and support someone who's lactating through this, then yes, let's do it. And so I did my research, and my first love was lactation. And so I did the research about becoming a certified lactation consultant and realized how long of a road that really is. So throughout that, you know, I did all I could. I did all the reading again, and it was funny. I had went back to work 9 months after having my daughter, and I had this coworker, and I would always like credit like this to her and my partner at the same time. I'll never forget, like, she shared her story with me. She asked me questions that I was like, you know, this is not normal questions that like just anybody asks. And so she's like, wow, you're very supportive. Like, have you ever thought about becoming a doula? And I was like, no, never. Like, I didn't think that was something that I can get into. And then later on that day, my partner was like, you know, something came over me. Like, have you ever thought about becoming a doula? Like, we had one, like, all the work that you're doing, like, you might as well be a doula. And I was like, no. So of course, that then put me into another, like, yes, like, let's do this. Let me figure out what I have to do, you know, to become one. So that started my doula journey. In a nutshell, my experience was really pivoted through my experience in wanting to help others and seeing, you know, how easy it is to just, well, not easy, but just how much birthing folks need that support to get them through a tough time, or how much lactating folks need support just to get them through, like, okay, this sucks, you know, but I can get through it because I have someone telling me, like, this is normal or this is not normal. Let's try this instead of this. Like, it doesn't have to be this natural thing that comes to us, because it may be natural, but it's definitely not instinctive. So, yes.
And you touching on support like that is super, super duper like needed in birth work. Yeah, because I'm glad you had that support, you know, from your partner, from those outside that, you know, you were working with. So like, yeah, support is definitely needed, and a lot of folks really need it. I always stress it, as you guys can tell. Like, it's definitely needed because, like you said, it's no sugarcoating the whole situation to make it look like sunshines and sprinkles and, oh, you'll do just fine, because it's going to be moments. Yeah. You're not going to do just fine. You're going to feel like you don't know what you're doing, you have no idea or whatever, and that's okay. That is okay, even whether you're a first-time parent or you've been doing this for a while, you have multiple children. It's okay to have those feelings of not feeling supported, but it's good that, you know, it shifted to inspire you. Unfortunately, you had a traumatic, you know, we'll call it trauma because it is what it is, type of experience, but it shifted into that whole support, and your support was kind of giving you signs and sprinkle, like, you're already doing the work with you being passionate and wanting to be informative and all that great stuff. So why not? So like, that's awesome that you had that support to kind of push you in that direction, unfortunately, from the experience that you had. But in overall, you had like a supportive network. So that's great.
Absolutely.
I mentioned that you also are an EBB instructor. So, can you tell us like what has been your experience in becoming into that role, and now that you are in that role as an EBB instructor, like what it's like, especially in your community?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started my doula journey, I started listening, of course, to the EBB podcast. And oddly enough, the EBB podcast really led me to a lot of healing. And so, like through the knowledge and everything, like, oh, this is why this happened, and oh, this is the research, and this is why this happened, and this is how the doctors work, and this is how nurses work, and giving me that understanding. So when I became a doula, I was like, I absolutely have to become an EBB instructor. And so I looked up the requirements. I wasn't there yet. You have to be a birth worker for a year to become an EBB instructor. So I was like, okay, that's my first. So probably a year and a half passed, and then I applied and I got in, which I didn't think would happen. But my experience was so amazing, and people really jumped to it, whether it was birth workers or pregnant families, because they really understood and they all listened to the podcast. They're like, yes, this is the information that we've been waiting on. And so, my favorite part about being an EBB instructor is not only being able to like teach the workshops and things like that, but it's the community. Like EBB has always been there. My favorite part is, of course, the peer-to-peer calls. I'm always filled up by being able to talk to other people who are in this work and are like-minded and just get me and understand. And so it's always speaking life into each other. Like there's never a peer-to-peer call that I don't leave feeling like, yes, I feel like my cup is full. So, it's priceless being a EBB instructor for sure.
And I would definitely say, if you guys haven't heard enough of us talking about it via social media about the retreat, because that's how we felt at the retreat. Like I felt that was like a glimpse of what the peer-to-peer type of support is going to look like, because EBB is about, you are healing. You're unlearning a lot of things. You're relearning a lot of things. You are, and not just necessarily in birth work, but with yourself. Definitely that's what the program's about. Don't know that I'm also an EBB instructor. So I know this firsthand, like going through the training, it's literally just kind of checking your own biases, because we all have biases. We all have learned things that are not so quite supposed to be helpful. They're more harmful. And, it's definitely an experience just growing with an organization as birth workers, as instructors, just to know that we're here to literally be the advocates of evidence-based birth work. Like that's pretty much how I feel, how I view EBB. Like we're the advocates of evidence-based, research when it comes to birth work. So yeah, it's definitely a beautiful thing. It's, great that, EBB provides that space, that environment for birth workers, like you said, who are like-minded, who are like, this is my mission, to make sure that especially those who are coming from marginalized communities are heard. We also tell our own stories if we're coming from those marginalized communities, to share that we've been there, done that. And that's why, why we're here. So can you like share with our listeners, because you're not only, an EBB instructor, you shifted into, or you are in this role as our program's team assistant. So like, tell them what's that about. Like, let them know, because, that y'all do a lot. Especially, for EBB, like y'all do a lot when it comes to the program section. So can you share with our listeners what it's like to be a programs team assistant for EBB?
Yeah, I love that you brought up the retreat, because the retreat really showed how truly like EBB is all about family and all about support and being a part of a team that really truly cares. Because usually we, hear companies who are like, yeah, we're family, and you're like, this doesn't feel like a family, but it really does feel that way. But I love being a program team assistant. I love being able to support the instructors and the pro members and just being the support where needed. I'm learning new things every day, which is great, because there's always something to do at EBB. And I love being able to keep busy. I don't like to just sit in one spot. I'm always like, Kat, what do you want me to do next? And what am I doing this week? What am I doing today? And so it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, we have fun here. Like, yes, we put out, evidence-based research that is, can be a little intimidating, is very, and it's all, of course it's serious, but, we're doing hard work. We work hard, we play later, but sometimes we, play while we're while we're working, because, you have to do that. This is a hard job as far as just being a birth worker, and then reading about the research that's against, especially bodies of color, especially Black bodies in birth work. So yeah, we definitely have fun, because like I always tell folks, like this is like a family. Like, never been somewhere where you can truly be yourself, and you're supported. You don't have to be somebody you're not just to get by. So like, kudos to Rebecca for like creating that space for all of us to just like come here to do the work that we're doing and our passion in it. So yeah, but we're just happy that you're here, because we've been needing somebody like you. And and just like we're still, even though we've been together for a little bit as staff members here at EBB, like we're still kind of getting to know each other. But the more we know each other, the closer we are. We're like, oh, I didn't know about. That's what we learned about the retreat. We're like, I didn't know that. Oh, so yeah. So I want to kind of switch it up. I did mention before, outside of EBB, you are this great birth doula. I follow your work on IG, and because like you're doing these amazing things. So I want everybody else to know, while they're listening, can you speak about your mission to empower expectant families, especially those in need of birth and lactation support?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I can only account that to like my experience, and going back really quickly to my pregnancy, the first thing I wanted was community. Like, I just had this innate feeling like, hey, I just want to be around other pregnant folks, or I just want to be around someone who gets or can guide me through this experience, because I was brand new to Vegas. I just moved here that at the time. And so, but I went to different spaces and I didn't feel comfortable there. And so my mission when I became a doula, I was like, no, there's not going to be one person that comes on my page that doesn't feel seen. So it's very intentional when you go to my page and you go to my website. Like, I just want everyone to feel like, hey, this is a place for you. And so that's why I co-created Heart and Soul, because I really wanted folks to have that home base to come to and feel like, hey, I belong here. I can be supported in this space. No one's going to, act like I'm not supposed to be here, look at me sideways or anything like that. So, I also let my clients know that, the support is always there, because support doesn't end after you have your baby. I don't say, hey, I'm your birth doula, like, bye. No, like, the support is forever, essentially, especially when it comes to lactation. Lactation is so unpredictable. And so having that, having my families know, like, I'm always here, you don't have to be ashamed to reach out. Like, this is what I'm here for. And so, the support can't end. So that's my mission, is to make sure that folks, feel seen and heard, and, also comfortable enough to reach out when they need support.
Yes, because now I'm seeing that being, thankfully, more and more is coming about, social media, of course, that folks are becoming aware that support doesn't, like you said, does not stop at birth or when the baby's here, and then you're like, okay, I'm out. Have fun. Congratulations. The baby's beautiful. You did great. And that's it. No, like, it has to keep going. And I remember hearing somebody at the time say postpartum can be forever. And it's not just for 4 to 6 weeks. It's not just for a couple of months. It could be more than a year. It could be a couple of years, because you're adjusting to life, because life is forever evolving. Things are evolving, things are happening, and you're just adjusting to just having this new little human, or humans, multiples, just like, oh, I need help. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I've never had this before, or I did this before, and that was a long time ago, or this is very different. So yeah, so like for folks who are listening, not just because, we have not just professionals or those expecting, but also, it could be family members listening for those expecting. So what do you feel is like a key thing as far as support for somebody who's a family member, might be their spouse or their partner or whoever, their supportive network? What do you think that person should hear listening to this, should be aware of when it comes to just birth support and just postpartum support in general?
Yeah, I feel like one of the hardest things about having a baby is sometimes you feel guilt, like if depending on like how your birth experience went, and especially after COVID, there's been a lot of folks who had to pivot, like what it looks like, and so being that listening ear, just listen, can make a world of difference. Like as birthing folks, sometimes you feel like, oh, I need to be thankful just because I have a quote unquote healthy baby. Like that's not all that matters. They need to feel seen and heard. We don't really get to hear, the actual birth stories of folks because we don't want to say the wrong thing or make it sound like we're ungrateful for our baby to be here. But those are two different experiences. Of course, we're grateful that baby is here, but what happens with, the type of healing that we need, even if the birth goes perfectly, we do want to hear that story. We want to give space to hear, what that person went through, not just say, oh, you're good. Like millions of people give birth every day. Bye. It really does take someone to listen and hear and see you in that period, especially after having the baby, and really just, not putting your own experiences, not telling them, not to feel what they're feeling, just give them space to feel what they're feeling. Let them know that you see them, keep checking on them. Even if it's been 3 or 4 months and they've got a groove, still check in to see like, hey, do you want to talk about anything? How is baby doing? How are you doing? Everybody asks how the baby is doing. So ask how they are doing, ask how they're adjusting to, like, even if it's seeing their baby grow, like that in itself is like hard because you're like, oh my goodness, my little baby is growing up. And there can be a lot of feelings around that, especially if it's like, say, the last baby, like this is the last time they're going to be going through this experience. So really just honor where they are, don't try to pressure them into being, quote unquote, who they were. It's a new normal, and help them adjust to that.
So what do you think, those who are listening who are birth professionals, what do you think they feel they need to do, or what are some ways they can assist those expectant families, whether virtually or in their community, especially to better support marginalized families with birth and lactation support?
Yeah, absolutely. And I say the same thing. Like, don't forget to check in, especially if it's virtual, because we can, easily get on Zoom and put on this like face of like, oh, I'm perfect. Everything is fine. But the world is crashing around you, and we're still dealing with, a collective trauma that we've kind of all been affected when one way or another. Especially when it comes to birth, a lot of birthing folks, as we know, as birth workers, we weren't allowed in the hospital, and we really had to pivot and give support virtually. And I feel like, we all have been able to do that in a good way, but you're also dealing with your own stuff, and so one of the things is thinking about like how our own biases, especially implicit bias, may come up, and understanding that it's not, take one workshop or seminar and boom, I'm anti-racist, and boom, I've done the work. Like, no, it's a continuous thing. You have to keep doing the work. You have to get uncomfortable, because the more uncomfortable you get, the more you can understand and say, hey, and we're all going to cause harm, hey, I messed up. How can I do better? And really seek to do better, and just understanding that, like, of course, I know there's this big push, as it should be, to have, a birth worker of color in your corner if you're a birthing person of color. But in some areas, that's just not an option. So it's really important that, birth workers who are not from the community really learn and understand, where that community is coming from, how to serve them by asking them. Don't try to do your own, like, quote unquote research. Like, it's important to listen to the voices of the families that you're trying to support.
Yes, I agree. Because I see that a lot. especially where I'm from, where I live. It's very robotic. It's very, I'm going to ask the questions on this paper and that's it. I don't, and at the time, we get it. We get it. You have to ask those questions, but at the same time, this is a human being. This
Right.
human being has feelings. This human being may have these feelings that they are trying to navigate through and process, and kind of throwing those questions at them and not really saying, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Do you, kind of, do you have support? What's going on? But you also have to create that space. You have to build that rapport so they're comfortable with letting you know, I do not feel okay. I don't know what I'm
Absolutely.
doing versus, how are you feeling? I'm fine. Any problems? No. Like, kind of that, you, of course, you have to build that rapport with them, but you also have to be that, are you sure? Like, what does fine look like to you? Like, you have to dig a little deeper and, instead of just like barely scratching the surface of the I'm fine, I'm okay. I'm just tired. I'm exhausted. And also not throwing in the whole, well, that's expected. Of course, you're going to be exhausted. They don't need to hear that. Nobody
Right.
wants to hear that. Like, that's what I heard when I first had my child. Like, I'm literally
You're like, no,
a
help
first
me.
time parent. This is not helping me at all. Like, I'm a first time parent and I'm hearing, oh, that's expected. Of course you're going to be exhausted. You just have a baby and well, how's the baby doing? Like you said before, don't just ask about how's the baby doing. Like, how's the parent doing? How are the parents doing? How is the family doing and adjusting? Because there are different family dynamics that, a lot of folks aren't aware of. And even there are some folks who are single parents or, they're adjusting to doing this alone or having very limited support. So definitely, I definitely agree with you. It's literally the same thing as far as partners, spouses listening to this or family members support listening to this. Is also, ties in with the birthing professionals. Like, we get it. You have to ask these questions due to, whatever reasons, but at the same time, this is a human. We have to get back into that human experience, that person-centered type of experience for folks, especially those who are coming from marginalized communities who are not so used to that support at all. Definitely. So what do you have, if you want to share with our listeners, do you have like any upcoming projects you would like to share with our audience or any projects that you're currently doing?
Yeah, I have so many things in the works. Of course, my brain is always like, "Oh, what can I do? What can I do?" So I have to always like one thing at a time, one thing at a time. So right now, my biggest focus for 2022 is obtaining my lactation consultant credential, God willing, in the fall. And of course, one of the biggest barriers to that is getting your hands-on hours. So right now, with my amazing mentor, we're both going to be launching a latch clinic at Heart and Soul. And so if you're in Vegas, please come and need help with lactating, please come down. But yes, that's one of the big things that we're working on. And lactating folks can come in and they can get help with the pump or help with latching baby or other education. But yes, that's the biggest one. And of course, childbirth education classes. I'm teaching the EBB childbirth class.
You have a lot on your hands. And yes, that getting your credential as a lactation consultant, it's hard. It is, but it'll be well worth it. You'll have those, as I call alphabet soup, on the end of your name.
Right.
So, I'm definitely sure like your community be so fortunate and so like blessed to just have you just step in as a, IBCOC. So yeah. So congratulations on that. Definitely. Cause you got
Thank
this. You got
you.
it. It's
Thank
okay.
you.
You got it. So how can our listeners follow you and your work on social media?
Yeah, so I'm on the interwebs. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. You can find me at Sacred Journey LV, or my website is www.sacredjourneylv.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rikki, for coming on the podcast. And if those who are listening, if you would like to review this episode for the Evidence Based Birth podcast, please do so on any of the podcast platforms you're listening to right now. Also, be sure to check out our YouTube channel as well. You'll see me and Rikki chatting it up during the podcast. And everybody who's listening, thank you for listening to the EBB podcast. Bye.